How's it going, guys? Happy New Year and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about 5 tips to kind of focus on or think about to improve your photography in 2021. So this is mainly going to apply to a lot of beginners. These are like beginner tips, but it can also help you regardless of if you are a beginner or not. If you're just trying to get better in photography, these are some of the things I focus on that kind of help me out through this journey. Just to kind of clarify, I'm not a professional photographer. Photography is a hobby for me, but it's something I really enjoy and have gotten quite proficient at, in my opinion. Some of these things might be subjective. Since photography is a subjective hobby, some of the things might look good to me, but might not necessarily look good to you. So take some of these tips with a grain of salt, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. All right, let's get started. So maybe you've gotten a new camera or you haven't used your camera in a while. Something you really need to focus on or emphasize on in photography is to understand your camera. Know all the ins and outs, how to work your camera, how to change settings, etc., etc. Go through the menu settings and everything several times until you understand how to kind of switch things like ISO, fix exposures, aperture, all those things. You really need to know your camera well, so when you're on the field or you're trying to take pictures and stuff like that, it is very natural to you. You know what you need to do when you need to do it. Just know your camera very well, and this might take months. This might take a while and thousands of pictures until you truly feel like you understand your camera, but this is something that really needs emphasis. Understand your camera. The next thing I want to talk about is kind of a composition basic. This is about the rule of thirds, and the rule of thirds is talked about very heavily. I don't necessarily think you have to frame every picture with the rule of thirds in mind. I honestly don't even use the rule of thirds anymore. I kind of just take what looks good, and it happens to kind of follow a lot of these guidelines. But if you don't know what the rule of thirds is, it's basically splitting your photo into 3 different squares horizontally and vertically, so you come out with a total of 9 squares. And this is kind of important for framing your picture. Where you place the subject affects how the picture looks. Pay attention to where your subject is looking as to where you are framing your subject. So for example, if your subject is looking towards the left, you don't want to put your subject on the left side of the photo as well, because there will be nothing that it's kind of looking at in the photo. Does that make sense? Instead, you want to contrast where the subject is looking with open space in the composition. So this is kind of how you make use of the rule of thirds, one of the basic things to focus on. So I greatly recommend that you start paying attention to how you are framing your pictures and try and think about making the composition make sense. So kind of bouncing on this idea, I kind of want to talk about composition angle, because the way you angle your camera affects the photo and changes kind of the mood of the photo. And this is something very important to pay attention to, because if you don't do this intentionally, you might be creating kind of an effect on the photo that you didn't intentionally want it to do. When starting, it's very important to practice staying level with your subject. This is when you're pointing your lens directly at the subject, so there is no kind of downwards angle or upwards angle. And this is a really good thing to practice, because then you know kind of a baseline for how you should be shooting. When you shoot at an upwards angle, the viewer kind of looks a little more submissive. When you're shooting at a downwards angle, the viewer tends to look more, small or minuscule. And this is important in photography because you can play around with these things. It can add an effect or benefit towards your pictures, but if it's not necessary, then it's doing more harm than it is good. So I would try to take a lot of pictures at a level thing with your subject, so you can avoid having any kind of things interfering with your photo, and then add on kind of those angles if you want to switch it up later when you understand them more. But for now, pay close attention to how you are angling your composition, because this affects the viewpoint. Next up, I want to talk about ISO. We're not going to go too deeply into exposure compensation because that is more for manual like shooting and stuff like that, which I believe takes a little more understanding of photography. So this is not really a beginner tip thing, but if you're taking pictures on the daily, do not be afraid to bump your ISO. ISO is another way to control exposure in the photos, and I feel like a lot of people tell people to shoot at the lowest ISO because it retains the most detail, etc., etc. But if a photo is poorly exposed and the ISO is too low, it's not gonna look good no matter how much you edit it. So don't be afraid to bump ISO, because a lot of the cameras in today's modern age, especially in 2021, can handle that kind of high ISO shooting without losing too much detail, creating too much noise, etc., etc. I strayed away from bumping the ISO for the longest time, and I think that kind of hindered my photography. And I would encourage you guys to play around with the ISO settings, because it's more important to take a well-exposed photo than it is to take an underexposed photo and figuring out that you can't play with it in post. This is perhaps what I would consider the most useful tip for you guys this year, especially if you're a beginner starting photography or you're just trying to get better, and that is to edit almost every photo. Now, I know a lot of people are kind of against editing workflow and like post-processing and all that stuff because it makes it kind of more fake and it's less straight out of camera. But think of this as a practical experience. The more you edit your photos in post, the more you understand the kind of shots you had taken. It's kind of like reviewing an essay or something like that. You're taking a look at your photos and you're like, oh, did I expose this properly? Did I underexpose this? What can I do to make this photo better? It's almost like you're reviewing the pictures you just took. So it's very important to edit nearly every picture you take, because then it allows you to reflect on the picture you've taken. Furthermore, it allows you to play with colors and allows you to play with sliders. So you can understand kind of more of your preferences, how you wish to shoot and want to shoot in the future. I think that is honestly more important than taking a good photo, is to understand what is a good photo to myself. You know what I mean? So editing pictures in Lightroom or anything like that, honestly, if you don't have Lightroom, it's okay, just use whatever you have. But editing pictures in post-production is extremely important to understanding the pictures you are taking now and the pictures you will be or wish to be taking in the future. It narrows the gap. It allows you to take more practical steps to taking a better picture in your eyes. So that's why I say you should edit almost every picture. Some of them are unsalvageable, so don't edit those ones, but you will understand which ones are good pictures and bad pictures by the time you spent in post-production. All right, thanks for sticking with me, guys. Those are my 5 beginner tips for starting photography or even just improving your photography in 2021. Hopefully they made sense to you. If they didn't, leave some comments down below. I'll try to answer your questions. And if you like this video, please do like and subscribe to my channel. I am trying to put out a lot more photography content in the future, especially about my cameras, but just as general purpose as well. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys. I will catch you in another video. Peace.